Welcome to another edition of the Pure Signal podcast. You got myself, Ryan Medellin, a marketing solutions manager, joined by my sidekicks. And yeah, I'm going with the sidekick moniker again. Sorry, guys. We got our North America CEO, Kevin Erickson, and of course, our Global Chief Innovation Officer, Jake Carter. You want to make your comment about the sidekicks?
No, I figured I'm going to let it slide today.
But our sidekick, he's dressing better. Like, who is this guy over here?
I was just commenting on the cardigan.
It looks sharp. It is sharp. It's a Friday here, and I'm glad that someone showed up wearing something that was decent. And you got a collared shirt on too. So yeah, that is the value that you're going to get from today's episode is fashion police from three folks that don't really care.
I recently discovered the cardigan, and I'm quite the fan, especially in this time of year where it's not necessarily cold, but it's not hot. So it's an easy piece of clothing to take on or off based off how Texas wants to Texas.
I like it.
It was 11 degrees in the city yesterday, so I'm still kind of thawing out a little bit from that, and the joys of snow piles from in a city.
Which city?
I was in New York. I spent 3 days in New York this week, which was really good and fun. But they're still shoveling out from a week ago. So
apparently, that's been a massive thing. The pileup of the snow in the big city, and how that's been an issue and ruined a lot of vehicles that have gotten snowed in. But I'll tell you what, guys, speaking of vehicles, I find it very fitting, our guest that we're having today on the podcast, because this morning on the way to school, I introduced my kids to a new song. And the song was Safety Dance by Men Without Hats.
Good. And
they are obsessed. They continually ask, Daddy, more safety song? More safety song? And this episode has a little bit of flavor of that to it, because joining us on the Pure Signal podcast, we told you we would bring more interesting guests so you didn't have to hear just from us three every single episode. And that's exactly what we did. We said we would do that last episode, and we've already made it happen. Look at that, moving and shaking in 2026. But we're talking about the 2 T's and more of AI, machine learning, and technology, trust and transparency, and how that fits into a connected ecosystem. And who better to do that than one of our partners here at Credera, Ellen Gates. Ellen, how are you? Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks. I'm doing great. I'm also digging out from snow, so I think we got a couple more weeks to go, though.
Now, what we like to do when we have our guests on is we need to establish credentials up front so people know, hey, you need to listen because these are important things you're about to hear. So, Ellen, if you would like, please just walk us through who you are, what you do, and how you use that in your everyday life and in your work.
Sure thing. So I'm a partner in our data and AI practice here at Credera. And I've spent my whole career in this space of data science, data strategy, and marketing. So how do you think about using data to actually provide business value, provide value to your customers, and think about how the technologies that underpin marketing systems can work together to actually create transformative experiences that are powering that mutual value exchange. So, what's good for business and good for customers is what we actually land on.
I have to jump in and say Ellen is a little bit underselling herself, which is not surprising because it's Ellen, but I'll add a couple things that you might not know. One, she has these letters, what are the letters? Oh, PhD in this space. So, minor deal there. She also, before she joined Credera, I don't know if you know this, she was the vice president of data. I might be getting it wrong, Ellen, at Monster, but she led the whole data transformation at Monster. Is that right?
That's correct. So I was leading the data office there. So it's everything from the engineering to the algorithms and analytics and insights across sales, product, marketing, enterprise. So we had a big data replatforming and transformation. So how do you go from having a bunch of this classic story of disparate systems that don't talk to each other in different business models? How do you actually bring that together in a cohesive framework that is then able to surface insights quickly and actually get to your core business objective, which is how do you help people find jobs?
Well, what I love about that is, and I think this is true of a lot of the partners, but like you've lived the area that you work in. So when you're working with clients, when you're giving the advice, it's not coming from a place of like, hey, I've studied this. Well, I guess it is for you, but it's also coming from a place of like, I have lived this and suffered. So anyways, that's my pitch on why I listen to Ellen. She knows a thing or two.
Yeah. No, and Ellen, one of the things that, we've spent a lot of time talking about ramping up to 2026 is, what do we expect to happen this year? And one of the themes that we keep coming back to is that it's no longer a waiting game, right? Like it's here. And I think right now, a lot of people, whether it's people that are building these systems or people that are going to be affected by these systems on the consumer side of the house, there's a lot of gray area and question marks of like, where does the complexity end versus how does that affect trust that these companies want to build and continue to build with their consumers and their buyers and whatnot. So that's one of the first things that we want to camp out on here is just this idea of, when we talk about trust and transparency, it's now more prevalent than ever to establish those types of things and how those can live and work together. So I want to open us up there and just start with that topic. And Ellen, get your thoughts on what you're seeing and what you're hearing as far as the two T's go.
Yeah, I would say this is a moment of change. So marketers and brands have been thinking about like using data to personalize and to engage your customers and to be smarter about how they go to market. For a long time, one of the challenges has often been that there's some friction in doing that it's actually kind of hard to do, especially for any kind of brands and companies that aren't digital native. So the level of effort to really say like bring together all of that data and to come up with like meaningful insights and to act on that in the past has been, it has been a harder thing to do for a lot of brands. And now that we have with the ability of kind of agents and AI and the more technology, it's much easier to get there. And, you can now use like a chat bot interface, like something simple to say like, who are my best customers or how much did I sell? And, you can get answers on that very quickly. The thing is, if you don't fully understand all the data, like we've talked about bad data or questions about data in the past, you still need the diligence to know that it's right. Like you can get to answers much faster, but it doesn't necessarily tell you that those answers are correct for one thing or that they're meaningful for another. If I can give a couple examples, this is actually more from personal life even. So getting advertising from banking company, so personal banking, and they were sending, I think it was for a credit card. And the advertising that I was getting was something along the lines of, no one's a bigger Yankees fan than you are. And I'm from Boston. So
known for their Yankees fans.
Yeah. The love of the Yankees.
Yes.
Yeah.
So somewhere in their data, some sort of signal that connects me and New York somehow. I've never bought tickets to a Yankees game or something like that. Heavens. But I
would never.
When it gets in front of the customer that much more quickly, it can create a reaction. And this is something that people care about. So it's got nothing specifically to do with the credit card or the business, but the way that you can jump to an inference and it can be wrong is something that really matters. And so we have to be really thoughtful about kind of what's that answer and what's the customer experience. Like, is this something they expect to be coming from the brand? And will it actually kind of help to pull them in, or is there, what's the cost if you are wrong?
I just want to make sure the record shows that our guest, Ellen, brought sports into the conversation before us. So thank you for that. That's an important piece. Our sponsors will be thankful that we clarified that.
Well, I'm gonna ask a follow-up question, Ellen, based on what you're describing, because you've written before about this phrase that I thought was super interesting, which is the gap between what AI can do and what customers understand that it can do. Is that the same thing that you're describing? Is that like the same dynamic, or is that a different dynamic?
That's one way that the dynamic can come through for sure. Is that like people notice it most when it's wrong, right? Like if everything goes well, and so it creates some confusion or dissonance when it comes to the wrong answer. I think that with AI, we have the potential to take it a few levels further. And people talk about the creepiness factor, for example, of being able to process signals from lots of different places. Like I do a lot of work in automotive, and a car is like one of your most personal spaces, right? Besides your phone, maybe.
Yeah.
Where like so much of your life happens, and it's so tied to your personal identity, but also like reveals a lot about your life and your existence. And this idea that you can, that now cars are capturing a lot of that data about you, and to be able to be making inferences about what it is and what you do is kind of the level that you can get to with that versus what you could get to with maybe like what people are shopping for online or something. Like if you think about the number of signals that you could pull in, like that can be really alarming to people.
I see. Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense.
I have a follow-up on that because when you're talking there, in my mind, I'm thinking of, with the changes over the last 10 years or so and people being more protective of their data and the more pop-ups that are popping up on websites of like, yes, you can share my data, all of those things, or even like just the most simplest form of that of, you're receiving emails from a company and you can opt out of receiving those emails. This may seem like a silly question, but is there ever a scenario where somebody can opt out of being plugged into the models that companies are establishing and saying, I don't want any AI coming my way from your business? I mean, it sounds silly and like it seems like we're all going to say you have to just live with it. But I do feel like with this era of data protection and protection of what you want to share versus what you're willing not to share, it seems like that has to be a question that has to be asked.
Somewhere a trial lawyer just added a future revenue stream in their revenue projection. Thank you for that. But now, Ellen, please come redeem that statement.
But I think that that's a sign that that brands in the industry should be really thoughtful, because AI is not one thing. It's lots of things and lots of tools. And I think very quickly we're going to get to a point where it's really hard to differentiate and say like there's AI in this or not, because it can be an ancillary part of the process or not. So that's where kind of the transparency on the part of brands in the industry is going to become really important. Like we've talked in the past about using data in transparent ways, and that's the whole idea behind like GDPR. I don't think people actually read all the terms and conditions, but like how your data is used and what it's allowed to be used for. And AI is the next iteration of that. Like, how can your data be fed into AI? Like, can your health information be used to inform models? Does that create any kind of personal liability? Could it be sent to your insurance or something like that? But I think we've got to be really clear, like there are like finding out like where is it that people are going to be sensitive to it? Where do people need to be informed? And with data, that's always been how much of the data do people own, of their own data do they own about how they interact with different experiences versus kind of what's the role of the brand.
Yeah. And then how does it evolve and clean up, right? I mean, that's going to, that's where I was kind of joking about, I think the whole GDPR, the European, those type of things, it seems logical that it will go there, but it's a very different problem, I think, because it's not so much about ingestion or, today maybe an ingestion of data, I can wipe that clean, I can work through that. But in this scenario, where is it? How do you actually wipe something away from a learning module? And so I don't, it's a real problem. And I think we, in this context of, where you have mutually assured destruction, right? We talked about that theme before in terms of data. Like you almost like you have to believe that everyone's just going to have access to it. So you have to assume that, that's one approach to it. But it's really, it's going to, it's going to come. And so how you think about it now, how you work through it, then I'm going to maybe pivot a little bit back to the, not quite the Yankees and the Red Sox example, but I think it's kind of interesting around maybe a slightly different take, maybe more consumer version of trust versus the PhD version of trust. But like in websites, I think like 20 years of websites, 20 years plus of websites, if you search a question, you're gonna get back links, you still have to choose your venture. You can still understand that that's different. Now the user experience within an AI model, it comes back so definitive. So my fear is often this is really just as every single half generation group of people become more and just using this tool, that just the ability to think, where is the individual ability to think play into that trust? And so I think about that from an employer perspective. I think about that from a father perspective of like, teaching, our daughter's geometry last night and trying to figure out what that, why are you doing that? I mean, you just literally plug it in a question and it comes out. And so I think that's going to be a really fundamental. I don't think this is a company issue. It's a societal issue though, too, of like, what is the human ability to reason and to understand and to decipher what is you're seeing when it comes across and looks like it. There's no probability of success that says this is 80% accurate, this is 90% accurate. Ellen went down to a party in New York 3 weeks ago, so therefore she gets a Yankees ad. I mean, it's like how that plays out. I mean, it's gonna be really challenging for us.
Well, and it comes back, I think, to the point that you were making originally, Ellen, around as it gets easier to make the inferences, to connect the data, it becomes more important to make sure that the underlying data is good. So, I'm actually curious, maybe connecting what Kevin's saying, I'll flip it around as a question to you. Like, what do you do if you're a business? How do you know that, oh yeah, this inference is based on good data versus this one is based on bad data?
Oh, that's the question right there. One of the things that we talk about when we talk about AI strategy, like governance is always a big part of that. And one of the lines in governance is first explainability, but also like kind of show your work. How do we build in some of those checks to say, this is where the information came from, so that you can go back. But you also, like, there's a people component of it. It's never been, acceptable for people not to think about their work and the quality of their work. And they need to have that same mindset when they're looking at the results or the output of AI and AI-driven strategies, is to make sure that, you interrogate and you confirm the source and what it makes sense. I think on the system side, we have to find ways to make that easy for people and not leave it as black box, because that's often the easiest way to do it. But like, how do you ensure that there are quality checks and you build that in as part of the process right from the beginning?
Okay.
Well, and that's why I think it's going to have to tying the two threads together.
Exactly.
Is that, we're going to have to, there's going to have to be a way to wipe data, which how you think about that. I'm going to throw another negative element in that. Let's, think about competitive research or competitor research from a political standpoint, right? That's 99.99% negative. And so, and that gets ingested in, whereas I think a lot of times if I'm in the auto space, I'm trying to sell the features of my car versus this, or my brand versus that. It's more inherently about what you get versus saying that, you should buy this versus that because that one sucks. But the competitive research element of the real negative, that is going to get seeped into all these things too. And so, even thinking about from a company perspective, how much are you, I'm sure it's already happening, but you're intentionally interjecting negativity into the model perspective as consumers continue to, go back to the car buying experience, right? I think for many of our folks now, they're going to continue to have they're going to make their decision based off research from models before they ever go into a showroom. And how does an auto company ensure that that's actually accurate? Whether it be, I'm injecting a negative Easter egg into that flow, or the model change between one year and the next, and the features are different. And so it's these are more questions than answers, but this is going to be really where we're headed. And I think it's going to have to come to a spot where you're going to probably have to start to police it, but I don't even know where you begin. Because you think about the different, every different model, every different company, you start having more private elements of that, your own edge model at the end of that. Like, there's going to be a gazillion different iterations of how things get populated through. I do think that, we've talked about this before. I do think that, I think more organizations, entities are going to be projecting their own data into that, which will have its own trust and transparency issue, because I can, make myself into a 6'8", NBA player in my background, right? It's like, or something like that, but I think it's so more questions today than answers, but I think it's going to be a real interesting question as this continues to accelerate.
Well, Ellen, I know we're going off script, and
Shocking.
We're on script. I got the script right here. We're good.
Oh, we're good. You
we're great.
Changed it on the fly?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have AI plugged into my spreadsheet.
Great. No,
Right, I'm here
Ellen,
for it.
riffing on that, I know, I guess you have to be careful about what you share, but do you mind talking a little bit about the work that you're doing with companies who are starting to think about, how do I make sure that I'm getting the right data in the model so that when consumers are doing their research, it's showing up?
Yeah. And actually, this isn't the first time we've seen this kind of a problem or issue or challenge before. And, if you go back to early days of the interwebs, when I worked with automotive for a long time. And so one of the things that they were having trouble with was, suddenly there are all these third-party research. Like, people love cars and people love to make content about cars, and there are websites dedicated to that kind of research. And they were finding like a few things. First, like, their brands weren't necessarily well represented out like in these other spaces, or even like organic search optimization, like they weren't showing up the way that they wanted to in search engines. And what they discovered then is, you need a strategy. So you need to think about, like, How do you partner with the major players in the space? What kind of information do they need? How does that need to be structured? How do you make sure that they're able to keep their own sort of version of editorial integrity or their business model, but also that like this is a mutually reinforcing ecosystem here? How do they, provide the right information, but make sure it's represented the way you want? And today we're going through a similar exercise of kind of understanding. It's, maybe moving at 100 times the pace of things in the past, but it is, how are your brands showing up right now in those? The idea of using natural search to find something like a vehicle that's special, like meets what you need is like, it's amazing. I've done it. And you get like great nuance. I drive back and forth to Boston and, the research tells me like, this is the car that would be perfect for that. It fits your dog. Like you got the highway. Now you might want the sportier version in the back roads, but like the idea that you can have this really tailored research is really powerful. But it's true, when I looked at the sources, not one was the manufacturer website. So you have to think about, how do you engage with these platforms and these tools? How do you think about embracing an amazing user experience? Like customers are going to love being able to really understand not like features, but benefits. And it's another iteration of that strategy. Make sure you show up well, figure out like where is this going, and how do you embrace the things that are a strength about these experiences and be part of the solution. If you let it happen to you, I think that's where it gets risky. Like you lose control over how you appear out in the wild.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me as I hear that, we've always discussed like, how does the human element fit into all this technology? And when I think about like trust and transparency and hearing about how brands are showing up and consumers doing their own research, it seems to me there's like this second level of validation or trust and transparency that can be built into, who's going to be answering the phone when that person calls the car company, or, if you're a brick and mortar shop and they come in the building and they have all this like, hey, I read here that I can get these types of things with these features. Would love to talk to somebody about that. It seems like that's kind of where the humans can really thrive in this space of like, okay, I've come in and I've done all this research using these models and none of it's coming from the manufacturer like you had referenced, Ellen. So I'm going to go validate these things, or at least have the opportunity to talk to a person about these things to double check and make sure what I'm hearing is accurate. And so to me, that's really interesting when I hear that of like, hey, there is an opportunity there for brands to leverage that human connection to kind of bring home or correct or maybe showcase a little bit more about what that research coming in looks like.
Building on that too, I think it's because we're going back to basics, right? And that's a kind of a theme for us. There be how you treat with people, how you run a company. Some of this to me goes back to, well, what's the first solution to making sure that people enjoy their experience? And that is like, well, build a better car. Like so it's like part of that is in the standpoint of like, what's the core purpose of a car company? Is it you build a vehicle, it has these different elements, and it's not like you're going to trust that people are going to see through all the the noise and the information on that. But I do think that for a lot of companies, if you do excellence in what your primary thing is, as all these different channels start to flow out, it's less about, I'm going to take, the classical lemon experience of a car, but through, whiz bang marketing, I'm going to make that thing into the best thing ever, and have, so I think that that's going to continue to occur. But I think, again, if you actually are really building unique elements of that, it may require to have more unique differentiation in your product. So I think that comes back to, I think what can companies control? Well, they can control that. They can control what they build. They can control their understanding of what the customers want. They can control the quality of that experience. They control the, Ryan, you just talked about the buy-in, the service, or those different elements of that. It's not perfect. I mean, you're still going to have to manufacture what you want people to see and how you live through that. But, it's almost impossible, I think, to be able to have the different ways that things are going to go, to be able to control that. And then just even the accuracy, that's the part that this is a little bit of a, maybe I have too much time on my hands, but a little bit of a parlor game of like, when you start asking random questions that go through a car buying experience, and you like actually get to real unique, like real specific details of like what you want. And then you like, either you already thought through that or you've done your own research before, you kind of knew that. It's some of it's kind of shocking of like, oh my goodness, like how accurate this is for what you would have answered if you just would have gone through normal channels.
Well, I think of all of us, you probably have the least amount of time on your hands. But I want to push on that. So, Ellen, I'm sorry that I keep asking you what to me seem like hard questions, but the idea of control. One of the things that is always going through my head on that is, where is the line between, hey, I'm being smart and drawing inferences with the data that I've got about consumers and just, good psychology, versus I've tipped into manipulation. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ellen? And maybe that goes a little bit back to your academic research, but I feel like that's the other ever present. There's some balance to be struck there, and I don't know where the line is.
So I think there's a conventional wisdom in marketing, which is that you should, like, doing right by your customers will be do right by your business. But I will say different brands approach that very differently and have sort of a different thought about perhaps where the line can be. I think that if you are willing to be as consumers demand more transparency, for one thing, about kind of how their data is used, and then even now how AI is used, it becomes harder to hide behind, the complexity of the work, and to sit in that space where it tips into manipulation. But it's also got to be part of like a company culture, and how do they handle the trade-off between pure transactional value extraction at the customer level versus, are you building a long-term relationship and thinking about how you continuously generate value over time? And I think with the manipulation component, as you talk about it, like, that's where, like, you can lose trust quickly, which takes a long time to build. Once you lose that, you don't really get it back.
Well, I mean, I like that idea. So you're basically saying that the desire for consumer trust is a bit of a self-policing mechanism, because if you lose the trust, it's hard to get it back. So that's going to be what keeps companies from tiptoeing into manipulation, in theory.
And so it's if you want to take it back to the academic research, like the game theory component, is it a one-time game, or is it a long-term repeated engagement where, that building trust over time ensures more of a customer value point of view, and it's not about any one transaction.
It's interesting we're talking about this manipulation piece right now because it's the Friday before Super Bowl Sunday. The big game, I guess I got to refer to it as. Some people get upset if you call it the Super Bowl. You got to say the big game. Advertising trademark kind of stuff.
I've never heard that.
Trick of the trade in broadcasting. But, all the commercials are starting to pop up of what will be featured during the big game. And I think 75% of the ones I've seen so far are AI companies making fun of or teasing other AI companies, and the fact that these models are going to start serving ads based off of the questions that you're asking it, like, hey, I'm having these emotional problems. Oh, have you tried this to solve those problems? And that seems to be a really big theme right now of, is that the next layer of this, of where you're starting to ask all these really pointed, specific questions, whether it's about a car or a certain product. And then the follow-up will be, oh, you should be interested in this type of product or this very specific product based off of what you're telling me or asking me. So I find it very relevant that we're talking about this now.
It's interesting to me on that is, I think that part of, the experience is, it's the early models, is that it's the fact that it is ad-free. It's theoretically without that influence. So part of me goes into it, where is it an explicit, like a banner thing shows up and you very much know you should try this particular brand versus that, versus it's more clever in terms of working through that. Will this be an area where you'll see more people choosing to purchase, that ad-free experience? Again, but they'll still find ways to do this. I mean, this is the classical, chicken and the egg in advertising forever. But I mean, I do think there, at least I can think of from this one user perspective, I do appreciate that I'm not being bombarded by that, even if it's happening a bit more behind the scenes and I really care to want to acknowledge. But I think it's going to be interesting to play, because I do think it's even like from the difference between the classical original, Google search versus this and versus that. I mean, I think it's a cleaner interface. And so it's going to be curious. And then specifically, as you start thinking about, as you continue to use more wearables and more element of like where you've got that information kind of constant feed, can you imagine the annoyance of like you have a constant feed of stuff happening to you and something in your peripheral, and all of a sudden you're having like, you click the wrong thing. And so you're Ellen and you're getting Yankees ads for every single thing. You're just getting pissed off. Yeah.
Forever. Well, I mean, I don't know if this is where you're going, Ryan, but I did see, tied to the big game, Anthropic, I think this morning, they're kind of moving their whole positioning around, hey, we're the ad-free AI, which I thought, I mean, just to me, there's some interesting competitive, again, game theory, Ellen, on, you know, how the companies are going to position themselves in that space.
Yeah, they've had a good week this week.
They have had an okay week.
We saw that with social media though, right? When social media started popping up, it was, hey, we're the ad-free social media platform. And now look where we are with, I mean, you pop onto social media, that's all you're getting. But now, Ellen, would love your thoughts on this topic as well. I think it fits into the manipulation piece and that consumer trust and kind of being empathetic towards consumers that you're dealing with.
Yeah. I mean, there's an alternate viewpoint to the ads being, you know, a negative in this space, is that it can also make it viable for companies to provide at a lower cost versus the subscriptions. Like they start at $20 or more for a lot of these tools. And so can you make it broadly available and still have, you know, a viable company? It's another point of view.
Making money on real product and real revenues, that's something that the AI companies
that's old economy.
Oh, that's old economy.
Yeah, that's not new economy.
Yeah, okay. I was just curious.
Are we back into the era where not making revenue it sounds familiar.
Right. I think we've done that before.
I want to jump into, Ellen, you and I, before we started recording, we kind of jumped into the connected ecosystem and how all this fits together. And obviously with your marketing expertise and technology and data expertise, there's this idea of control versus collaboration. You shared some interesting thoughts with me. I'm assuming you remembered them, but would love to dive into that and just get your point of view on that. And let's take the discussion there.
Yeah. So what we had talked about was how basically marketing and the technical side of marketing has come a long way. Now you need teams to implement the different systems, and you need to think about what's your data infrastructure and how do you keep that safe and how do you keep it functional. And what a lot of companies are finding is that they still have trouble figuring out, how do you actually make use of this technology? Like, how do you make it all work really well for you as a brand? And I think we talked about the divide between technology and marketing is that the level of technical effort required to implement marketing systems like, email CRM systems and configuring those, or customer data platforms, just to name a couple of them. And, there's a deep technical expertise required to implement that. And the divide between that and like a real marketing strategist who's got very creative ideas and inspiration and knows what to do with that and how to use that to engage customers and create experiences, it's getting wider. And the other thing we're finding is that there's more than one technical system. And it's not just how do you make your website work really well, or how do you make your CRM work really well, or your advertising. It's how do you make all of these systems work together really well to have like great customer experiences, to make smart marketing decisions, and to know that you're running your business really well and are serving your customers.
It was so profound that we're sitting there.
I'm like,
yeah. And really, I'm like, wow, this is when really smart people come and talk to us versus the normal stuff that we do.
We've been outclassed, Kevin.
Oh well, I mean, we knew that before we began, but yeah, I think that there's this maybe as a, I'm maybe speaking a bit more from my day job. I mean, this is where I get really excited about where we're at. There's all these different questions. We don't know what they're going to look like. Come back to this underlying fear of, job loss and things like this, to really the excitement of where I think you're at. I think it is interesting to see, we alluded a little bit to Anthropics Week, but just a little bit of like at least market acknowledgement between different models, between different approaches, between the impact a bit to potentially companies that have really dominated some of these spaces over the last 20 years, and which I think is a little bit slow to come. So it's kind of interesting to see how that sticks after, or it's just a point in time moment. But like, I get excited. I want to go tackle those questions. There's society questions. There's working through that. It's helping our clients figure that out. It's going in with boldness, but also going in with open mind of what that's going to look like. How do we learn? As Ellen, you've said very eloquently today, these are still lessons from the previous journey over the last 20, 30, 40 years that we can interject into this. It's going to look different. I mean, the pace is absolutely going so much more faster, how that plays into that. But I think that it's not going back. And so in that sense, we're going to have to continue to figure this out. And lean a little bit towards letting market try to figure that out. I know there's going to have to be regulatory and other pressures that will play in this as well. But, I think that the more that, I hope companies have that optimistic view of, if you serve your customer right, you serve your constituencies right, that's the right approach. And I think that goes back to me, again, different trust. You start with trust around, do I trust what I'm seeing in the data? But I think it's a little bit, do you trust the ecosystem and society that we're playing in as well?
And I think we have a role to play, those of us that provide the professional services in this space of, we do help our clients with the technical implementation of their systems and their data, but also in helping them to ensure that they know how to use it and that they think about not just any particular platform, but how does it work together? How do they use that to understand their customers? How can they actually kind of drive the value from it and use it in a way that first, leaves them, running their business really effectively, but that they can use that to make meaningful connections with their customers. Like if people have a different experience when they are on your website versus when they show up in your store versus, when they're in their mobile devices in the apps, like if they feel like they're talking to a different company or like that they're, there's no continuity between that experience, then like, that's like, it's frustrating. Like it's just expected these days that you have that and, helping our clients to actually do that and to create that consistency that makes people feel like, that they're trusted and they're viewed as a person. That's where that comes in.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes back to, Ellen, in my opinion, at least, of this idea of who owns that customer relationship, right? So I don't want to speak for all technologists here, but I would guess to say that most technologists don't care necessarily about that customer relationship. They just want to build really cool tech that does really cool things. But then you have, like you had mentioned, the marketer element that, in legacy companies, they own that relationship and they steward it forward and they make sure that the journeys align with what customers come to expect of the brand. Talk to me about, how companies or how you would approach companies about how do we break down that dynamic of like, hey, technologist, we know you want to build really cool things, but we want to make sure you're also caring about the end goal here, which is building loyalty with customers.
Yeah, we do that with a few of our clients, and it's about helping them to step back from any particular platform to be like, well, what's the experience of your customer end to end? Like, what does that really look like? For automotive, it's, people are out living their lives and experiencing the brand in their life context, and then when they start shopping, it's how are they kind of searching and discovering. How are they engaging with your brand? How are they balancing online and offline? And, what does the sales process look like through there? What are the systems that they interact with? Like starting to think about how the technology and the customer experience kind of go together. And, a lot of times the technology and the data are viewed as separate from the customer, but like the technology is the experience and the data is the representation of your customer throughout that system. Like they are the engagements that you see on your website and that you see in transactions. Like these are all the same customers. Like how do we help them to piece those pieces together, both kind of conceptually, but also like technically, how do you do it? And, our role should be like, how do you actually string those things together on a technical side so that you can talk about the customer throughout that experience and not talk about here's your media and here's your website sessions and here's your email engagement. We talk about what are all the things that happen to your ads and your media instead of, the ideal state is what's the experience of your customer as they traverse all those experiences. So how do we kind of turn that conversation from being very channel centric to being very customer centric?
Yeah, I love that. Couple minutes left here, gentlemen and Ellen. So I would love for you, if you have any final thoughts, if there's questions, Ellen, that we haven't asked that we should be asking or thoughts that we haven't covered that you'd like to get into, but want to make sure everybody has a chance to give their final thoughts here.
Well, I don't have a final thought. Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
I'm curious, maybe, Ellen, from your perspective or from, the guys here, where is the competitive advantage of a new entrant? because of all these things we're talking about, Ellen, you're just going through around now, thinking about how technology fits together, the ecosystem. I guess I find myself now, where does a new entrant come in? Can they break through the barrier? Can they, again, if our search becomes very much aligned within, models that are going to support, potentially more mature elements, or, I mean, I'm just kind of curious, man, maybe auto's such a mature business, how does a new entrant come in that's not really geopolitical based? But I'm just kind of curious, like, where are we going to see that? Are we going to end up seeing there's going to be an incumbent advantage that's going to be for the large providers that already has, but even more so now in this new technical world that we're going to?
Interestingly, I really want to know what Ellen thinks. I could argue the opposite. I could see an advantage for a new entrant, and I'll hold my reasoning why until Ellen goes, and we'll see if I'm off base or not. But what do you think, Ellen?
I think both can be true in different spaces, but I was going to answer on I think there's room for new entrants in certain spaces, and like the barrier to entry to technology and running a platform right now has never been lower. Like what they say, I don't know, I don't think it's happened yet, but the first solopreneur,
right,
having $1 billion company, this was the year, right, that's likely to happen. And so the constraints on kind of getting a technology solution up and running are so much lower than they've ever been. And the kind of problems to solve, that space has changed. And there is opportunity to really create much more. Right now, it's a little bit like a fragmented ecosystem of major technology players. And there's huge opportunity to be the connective tissue in between those, for one thing, or to kind of undo some of those frictions that have been, kind of persistent, I think, in the past.
My argument was going to be, and repeating a theme that Ellen has mentioned, I think we've seen this in previous paradigms, but you alluded to a lot of these technology systems are so fragmented and so siloed. That's where I could actually argue that, a new player could come in, and the advantage could be, I am not encumbered by my data living in 80 different places and having all of these legacy systems, and I can kind of build from the scratch a system that's going to drive towards the unified experience that you've been talking about, Ellen. That's at least where my head went.
Well, I mean, from personal experience right now, working with a client that, based off of their goals over the next 6 years, they're bringing an entire new MarTech stack and technology stack to support what they want to do. And while there is a huge cost component of that, I think we'll find that it'll be more streamlined, kind of taking this greenfield approach to resetting up brand new systems. I liken it to moving into a new house, right? Like you have all this clutter in your old house, and what you really want to do is, clean that house up and get rid of all the junk before you move into the new house, because the last thing you want is that one room, which guilty as charged, still have it, 4 years later, full of boxes you just never really figured out what to do with. That's just taking up space that it doesn't need to be taken up. So to me, that's like a refreshing, in professional services, of like coming into a client that says, hey, look, we're tearing everything down and we're rebuilding. Sometimes previously we had to convince people pretty strongly that this was the approach you needed to take. But I think a lot more companies are starting to realize that now, that the opportunity lies with not necessarily starting from scratch, but like really taking a look at, if we broke this thing down to the studs, what does it look like building it back up?
I'm going to answer the question that you posed, which was, last thoughts. The thing that you mentioned, Ellen, that I think is maybe not most interesting, that was most surprising to me, that I didn't expect, was the degree to which the challenges that companies are facing right now when it comes to technology, specifically the marketing technology, and just this notion of technology matching up with marketing, are similar in nature to challenges that have been faced before. I say that because I actually think that could be comforting for a lot of people. The idea that, like, look, I mean, we all know this stuff is moving so fast, but even the point that you were making around, hey, the idea of how do I get my information, my brand's information, to show up in a generative model is not wholly dissimilar from how you were thinking about how do I, get the right information to show up about my features when I'm working with partners that, whatever, the car forums. So that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think right now marketers should be really optimistic. I think it's really exciting. It's like similar questions, but the tools that they have available to them now and will have available over the next few years, it's really exciting. It's going to change the way that they operate I think in a really great way, be much more empowering.
Kevin, any final thoughts from you?
going back to normal stuff. Excited about just again optimistic, very much echoing what Ellen just said. And I just think the more you care about your customers, you care about your product, do the good things, I think that you're going to be able to succeed and just continue to be able to thrive in that. And I think that it's going to, so I'm just, again, continue to building momentum and around what I think we get to do and just to see what the possibilities are. And so then I think that, and I hope I also still believe in some sort of, if you do bad elements to that will eventually hurt you as well. And so again, we're going to trust in a bigger macro scale.
Awesome. Well, Ellen, this has been absolutely fantastic. I think we learned more on this episode than we have in any episode previously. And I don't know if that speaks to us or how that looks, but this has been awesome. I just really thank you for taking the time to meet with us. And I imagine you'll be a recurring guest because I think there's a lot of big things coming that you could definitely speak on in the coming days, weeks, months, and years.
Yeah, thank you. I was really happy to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course. Well, that was Ellen Gates, one of the partners here at Credera. For myself, Ryan, for Kevin, for Jake, this has been another edition of Pure Signal. And Ellen, this is the fun part because I get to say, reminding you to be bold and what, Kevin?
I don't know anymore.
I think go Pats is what Ellen would say.
No, she'd say go Giants.
not go Yankees.
That's why you brought that back around all the way to my first example.
Yeah.
That's how we do it, right? It's a package deal here at Pure Signal. Well, thanks again. This has been Pure Signal. Tune in next time as we bring you more exciting insights from technology, machine learning, AI, and more.